Hello, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to another episode of Question the Narrative. We, just as promised, have brought Vinny B back and also another special guest with us. And this is going to be a very exciting show. And once again, I'd like you to sit down and strap on your seatbelts because you're in for a ride today. We got Vinny B. What's up?
Hey, how you doing, Ricardo, David, and everyone?
What's
Hey,
up?
Vinny.
Yeah, good to be back, man. I had a lot of fun. I felt like it was a fun show, a lot of good feedback. So, you know, I, I appreciate what you guys are doing and your podcast, and excited to be back and to bring a special guest. The last time I was on, I got into certain things, right, about the Civil War, the Jesuits. Um, and we talked about maybe me coming back to talk more about the Jesuits. And I brought up Eric Phelps. And I said, well, Eric Phelps is to me the best. I know you guys in the audience are flat earthers. And I look at it sort of like, like how a lot of people look at Eric Dubay as being like maybe the first guy that was like big on the internet that everybody kind of learned about in the early days. That's what Eric Phelps was for me with the Jesuits. It was a while ago, and it wasn't even a conspiracy platform. It was actually a Seventh-day Adventist I met who started telling me about the Jesuits back in 2007, and yeah, way back then, it was the first time I ever heard the Jesuits, and it was just some religious Seventh-day Adventist I met on the street. And so I was like, well, I got to find out who the Jesuits are. And right away, I found this guy, Eric Phelps, and his amazing book called Vatican Assassins.
Mhm.
And that was my first introduction. And, to me, I feel like Eric has been the best and like, the first guy for me, like, you know, um, and then a lot of people have learned from him. I remember you mentioned Johnny Cerrucci. Like Cerrucci's worked and learned from Eric Phelps. You know, so I'm excited uh, to that Eric has come here to talk to me. He knows way more than me on the Jesuits, and I wanted to add, you know, uh, back then it was like before that, I always heard my whole life the Jews. Everybody, the Jews run the world. It's the Jews, the Jews.
Right.
And this was the first time, like, where I found out about the Jesuits, and I mentioned to you guys, William Cooper was like my hero and got me into this. And I
Right.
remember him saying that, it's not the Jews. Um, and then all of a sudden I found Eric Phelps. And we got to have discern, right? Like we talked about, everybody's got to have discernment. You can't just trust anyone. You just hear something. So at first I was like skeptic. I'm like, well, who is this guy? Is he Jewish, protecting the Jews? Having discernment. And then all of a sudden, after like a couple years, I don't remember what year it was, but all of a sudden I was listening to one of his shows and Eric came out and started talking about flat Earth. And I was like, oh my God, he's flat earther now. I was like, this guy's the real deal. Yes. And, and I've got in touch with Eric and, I'm a huge fan and I believe he's an amazing researcher and he's one of us. So, yeah, I'm sitting here actually holding his book right now. It's a great book that people should get called Vatican Assassins. Absolutely amazing. I'm just stuck here, like at the end, Eric, in chapter 50, looking at a lot of these quotes. I remember the guys were talking to me last time about the Jesuit oath and a lot of things. But yeah, I feel like I've been talking a lot and I'm real excited. I just wanted to, give that little introduction to Eric. And yeah, I'm going to introduce you now, Eric. I'll let you talk.
Okay, pleasure to be with you, Ricardo and David and Vinny.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Pleasure to be with your listeners today, and I think we'll have a wonderful podcast, and hopefully the Lord will bring ideas to mind that will be beneficial to all of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Quick question, Eric. How many have you got multiple editions to this book?
I have 3 editions.
Okay.
The first one came out in 2001. It was about 650 pages.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and then, then I believe somebody crashed my computer. So I had to rewrite it. And so
Oh,
I wrote a second edition, but I didn't really like that. So I wrote a third edition. So I almost tripled the amount of information in my third edition that was in the first edition. So the third edition is 1,836 pages with 760 pictures and portraits. So, I mean, what's a book without pictures and portraits, right?
that's right.
So, so, so I put those in there, and I don't have it in print right now. I'd like to get it printed up shortly, but I do have my ebook that you can get and use it on your computer. And then I have 13 rare books that I scanned to be read in conjunction with my book. And I scanned the Black Pope when I found it in a library in a certain theological seminary here in Lancaster. And so I scanned that and then several others. So there are some good backup works that I have with my book. It's about 4,000 pages of these 13 rare books. So you have that, plus then you have my book. So you got about almost 6,000 pages altogether of information.
Nice. Yeah, I was looking your book up online, and I saw something about a third edition, so that's why I thought I should ask. You've also got a website, right? VaticanAssassins.org.
Yeah, VaticanAssassins.org. I haven't updated it for a while. I've been really busy with a project for a couple of years. But I have VaticanAssassins.org where you can purchase the ebook and a few other things I have in the store. And then I also have another site called 24/7 World Radio that you can listen to my broadcasts for free. And
Okay.
so I have those 2 things primarily that you can look at.
Nice. Yeah, your website looks great, man. There's all kinds of really interesting articles on here, man. I'm glad I found this.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his
Yep.
podcasts are great. And our mutual friend, shout out George Widger. You could catch a lot of the podcast with Eric. They're really good.
Yeah, George is wonderful, and I try to have him on once a week. And so
Yeah,
he,
a mutual friend of ours.
he
Good guy.
comes up with some of the most astounding facts that I really enjoy. So I try to have him on once a week for sure.
Okay. Nice. All right. Well, Eric, just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and your testimony, and then we can kind of dive into the Jesuits and just how powerful and evil that organization is.
Sure. Okay, I was born in 1953 in Oakland, California. I was raised in a place called San Pablo, North Bay in California there. And I went to Pinole Valley High School, graduated in 1972. I went into the Air Force in 72. I was in there from 72 to 77. Got out, and I went to Bible college. I went to 2 Bible colleges. I went to, first of all, Clark Summit Baptist Bible College in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. Beautiful campus. It was an old Roman Catholic a place where priests went to be educated, but nonetheless, it was a very beautiful campus. And then after 2 years there, I left and went to Lancaster Bible College and graduated there in 1981. And so after that, I decided that I would go into concrete work, and was poured and finished concrete for 15 years, and really learned to enjoy it. It was a wonderful experience. I mean, it kept me fit, but just the pouring sidewalks and doing a beautiful slab, and it's as smooth as marble when you're done. I mean, it was very rewarding. I liked it. While I was doing that, some Mennonites were helping me. And so I was able to write my book, and they would make me my meals and do my laundry and even pay my rent sometimes, which, I deeply appreciate it. But for 3 years, I wrote the book, Vatican Assassins. And I had acquired all that information for some like 20 years, 25 years or so. And I thought, well, Lord, this is a good time to do this. And as I failed to mention, I was saved when I was 17 in 1971. I came to know the Lord. I had no religious upbringing whatsoever, which may be good. And and after that, just read the Word of God, read the AV 1611 King James Bible, and began to grow in grace and knowledge of Christ after belief of the gospel. So at this time, after I was decided that I needed to write the book, I had been deeply affected by the Kennedy assassination in 1963. I was 10 years old, and I was in the 4th grade. And I remember my teacher, who I loved, Miss Beals, crying her eyes out and said, they've shot the president. He's been shot. And of course, the whole class was upset, and it really affected me emotionally. And I determined then that I was going to find who did that. And I remember Lyndon Johnson on the TV, being sworn in on the Roman Catholic missal there by that Roman Catholic woman with that Roman Catholic Knight of Malta, Jack Valenti, behind him in an Air Force One. And I remember that he looked guilty. And so on and off, after I graduated from high school, went to the Air Force, and then for that in Bible college. While I was in Bible college, I started to do a study on it, and I had an instructor, and his name was Dr. Rembert Carter. And Rembert Carter was a very difficult man. He was very proud, but he got his doctorate in history when he was like 24 or 25, like that, from Edinburgh, Scotland. And so I had him for World Civilization class. And in it, one particular day, he showed how the Jesuits had assassinated Lincoln. And he had his whole table of contents to check out these books. And he had an old original copy of The Suppressed Truth of the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, written by that lovely lady, Burke McCarty, in 1924. And that was a real wake-up call. So I was convinced that the Jesuits had done this. And that led me to the question, well, did they kill Kennedy? And of course, at the time, I didn't know much about them. I didn't know their political power. And so I figured that for me to prove that they killed Kennedy, I would have to have a chain of evidence. And I would have to go back to when they were founded in 1534 by Ignatius Loyola. Mm-hmm. And that they were brought into the papacy in 1540 by Pope Paul III. And I decided that I would have to go through their nearly 450-year history to show what they've done, to then come to the place in 1963 where they had the power to do this and to emerge unscathed, and nobody's blamed for it. So it took me about 3 years to gather all this information, and the Lord gave me a couple of really good teachers. And one of them was an ex-Jesuit named Paul Carroll, who lived in Ohio. So he helped research all my sources that I was quoting. And so I was very indebted to him for helping me to make the book even better, the 3rd edition. And so I had that, and I had another guy named Adrian Saber. Adrian was an Orthodox man. He lived in Philadelphia, and he was quite adept with the history of World War II. And so I learned much about the Jesuit influence and power of World War II, and especially that they controlled both sides, the Axis and the Allies. Both. So with that realization, that led to them, what about the intelligence communities? Do they control both the Soviet KGB and the American CIA? Well, absolutely. I was able to prove that. Which leads today, does that mean Putin and Trump work together? Absolutely. Does Putin and Biden work together? Absolutely. They all work together.
Yep.
So there is no such thing as them and us. There's no such thing as a Democratic and Republican party. They work together, or the Uniparty, all under the Archbishop of New York City, who is considered to be the American Pope, the most powerful papal prince of the church in the country, and he oversees the Council on Foreign Relations, where all these guys go into the executive branch and are running the military government for the president, who's commander in chief. Of course, we've been under military government since March 9th, 1933. We have not had civilian government for 91 years, and I addressed a lot of that in my broadcast. So anyway, from one thing led to another, and then I got into the mafia. Well, what about the mafia connection? Well, the book Double Cross by Sam Giancana's nephew proved that the CIA and the mafia worked together. Then you got Jim Garrison's in search on the trail of the assassins, and he shows that the mafia and the CIA work together. And so I've come to the realization that they're working together now. They're working together in the drug trade, and that the mafia is more powerful than ever because it's working with the CIA. So I connect the mafia to the CIA, to the Secret Service, to Army intelligence, to all the intelligence services that worked together for the assassination and cover-up of JFK, because JFK was a very great enemy of Francis Cardinal Spellman. And Francis Cardinal Spellman was known as the American Pope. In fact, there's a book you can get on it called The American Pope, written by John Cooney in 1988. And it shows the power of Francis Cardinal Spellman over all the major corporations. And you can see his all the power when he would host the Al Smith dinner every year in Waldorf Astoria. And he's hosting the political candidates and all the top senators and all the top people in the press. And it's just top corporate people. And you can see his absolute power as the American Pope in this country in 1963. So he oversaw it all. He had his Knights of Malta in key positions of power, like Lee Iacocca, like William F. Buckley, like John McCone, head of the CIA, like James A. Rowley, the head of the Secret Service. I named 20 Knights of Malta in my book, not to mention certain high-level Freemasons like J. Edgar Hoover and like Earl Warren and the President Gerald Ford later on. All these high-level Masons working in conjunction with the Knights of Malta. You even have a Knight of Columbus there, Hale Boggs, but he refused to finger Oswald, so they killed him with a plane crash over Alaska. So I cover all these secret society guys and how they're all working together for Spellman. And then, so to show that the Jesuits did this, and if the Jesuits killed Kennedy, why then they killed Malcolm X in 1965. They killed King in 68. They killed Robert Kennedy in 68. And they would also, the Jesuits using Spellman would attack the USS Liberty in 1967 with the Six-Day War, as directed by Lyndon Baines Johnson and his CIA, working with Mossad and Israeli intelligence. Remembering the government of Israel is the enemy of the Hebrew Jewish Israelitish people who have a right to their land, because that government works for the Pope and has always worked for the Pope. Mm-hmm. So I make that connection. And so several things like that in my book I think would be very valuable for your listeners, and that we not be duped into join, as white men particularly, that we not be duped into joining the new right. And this is what the Jesuits are doing. They're driving white men to desperation into the new right with the open arms of Donald Trump, that's been a Jesuit coadjutor since the days he was at Fordham. And so that's why we can see that Joe Biden, everything he does builds up Donald Trump, everything. Mm-hmm. So this is the dialectic that's going on. And my major concern is that we not be duped into this and fall for this new right, which is run absolutely by the Knights of Malta. If you read Betty Claremont's work on her work, The New Right here. So I also talk about Martin Lee's great work, The Beast Reawakens, where they want to implement a revived form of fascism here in America, just as Oliver Stone writes in his book, puts in his movie, JFK Director's Cut, when he's interviewing that one prisoner at Angola, the white guy. And he says, fascism's coming back. Well, that's exactly what the Jesuits do. So they tell us everything they're doing in their movies, and there's enough books out there to perceive what they're up to. So it's my purpose to attempt to frustrate that by at least telling the truth about them.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, okay, so they assassinated Kennedy, and Lincoln as well, you think?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I brought that up last time, Eric. Wasn't the guy's name Surratt? Maybe you could add more to it about the guy who was like. Because we're all taught about Booth, but there was the guy Surratt and how his mom got executed, and
That's right.
and Surratt, didn't he basically was taken out of this country by the Catholic Church, hiding him, and then they found him in Rome.
They found him in Alexandria, Egypt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You can read all about this in the great work titled 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Charles Chineke. Charles Chineke had been a Roman Catholic priest, and he came to know the Lord when he was a priest. And there's a tremendous portion in the book where he was accused of some sexual impropriety with a woman, and the jury was going to find him guilty until this lady, Miss Philomene Moffat, was brought to Urbana in Illinois to give testimony that she had heard the priest, Spink, and one other one conspire to create a lie about Charles Chineke, that he had done this thing, and that he would be condemned by a jury. And when she came out, and when she came and showed up in Urbana, and the priest saw her there, they were deathly afraid, and they got out of there as fast as possible, because it was known there the next day that the priests were behind this lie, and they would have been lynched. And so Lincoln raved against what they had done, and this terrible plot put out by Bishop O'Regan to get Chineke condemned by these priests. And so at the end,
Lincoln was the lawyer, right? Lincoln was the lawyer.
Lincoln was Chineke's lawyer. That's right.
Yeah.
At the end of the trial, Lincoln finds Chineke weeping, and he says, "What's the problem? Your enemies have fled, and you're acquitted, and everything is fine." And Chineke, as he's weeping, tells him, he says, "I saw no less." He said, "I'm not weeping for myself, Mr. Lincoln. I'm weeping for you." He says, "Because I saw no less than 10 Jesuits in the audience there with a sentence of death on their faces." And so Lincoln said, "Well, let this be my sentence of death." And he gave Chineke a bill for $50. That's all he wanted to have him paid. And then Lincoln got serious, and he said, "I know the Jesuits never forget nor forsake. And the important thing is that a man die at the post of duty and honor." And so Chineke writes in his book, and he says, from then on, when he said he would try to alert Lincoln of his impending assassination, and he would go to Washington to tell him. And he tells of the last time he saw Lincoln there, and that he knew that he was going to be assassinated. And it's a tremendous book. And he tells of the escape of Surratt, where he escaped through Canada, then to Liverpool, then from Liverpool to Rome, and then from Rome to Alexandria. Then he was put in the Zouave army of the Pope, where one man knew of this, and he went public with it. Mm-hmm. And then Surratt was arrested, brought back. He had 2 trials, and he was acquitted, particularly in the first one, by a woman on the jury who was Roman Catholic, who was taught Thomas Aquinas is Summa Theologica, that it's no murder to kill a heretic. So she acquitted him. And then John Surratt goes to die at the head of a steamship company in Baltimore about 1912, 1914. And in his funeral, he has a high requiem mass, according to the man who wrote The People's Padre, Emmett McLaughlin, who was a priest, a San Franciscan, but he left the priesthood. And he tells in his Rome's Assassination of Lincoln that 3 priests gave Surratt a high requiem mass, and he says he must have deserved it. Why, of course, because he was the overseer of the assassination of Lincoln, John Surratt. So Surratt was the murderer there, and the Jesuits will also kill James Garfield. They will also kill William McKinley. They will also kill Warren Harding. They will also be involved in the killing of Woodrow Wilson. They kill 14 presidents of this republic so far. So their power, especially over the press, is why they are able to get away with it. Power over the press and academia. And remember, the Jesuits are the authors of communism, socialist communism. We learned that from R.W. Thompson, Richard W. Thompson's great work, the Footprints of the Jesuits.
Recently someone told me that I must be Jewish, Eric, because I said that the Jesuits created communism.
Oh yeah.
Can you explain that a little?
Oh sure, sure. Yeah, it's in the book Footprints of the Jesuits by Richard W. Thompson. Thompson is the only American that's ever written a real extensive history of the Jesuits. I mean, I tried to do it, but Thompson was the ex-Secretary of the Navy. He was, in fact, involved in the overseeing of the Panama Canal. He was a man of power and wealth. He was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. And yet he still exposed the Jesuits and what they had done in various countries and at their times. And he shows that when he covers the topic of Paraguay, Jesuits are the founders of Paraguay and the Paraguayan reductions. Now, the reductions are what are in fact communes. Israel, you would call them kibbutzes. Everywhere else, you call them communes. And in South America, they called them reductions. And there were 59 reductions in Paraguay, in that general area of what we know as Paraguay and Brazil today. And on these reductions, they had cleverly enslaved the Guarani Indians. And the Guarani Indians were the natives there at the time. And by the way, you can go to Paraguay and you can see the remnants of these huge edifices built of brick that the Guarani Indians built, being instructed by the Jesuits on these reductions. And on these reductions, the Jesuits used the Indians to build violins, to have hides, tan the hides, have tallow. They also used them to mine silver. They used them to harvest the great Paraguayan herb called yerba mate. And yerba mate was the elixir of a drink that the Jesuits used then. They sold it in Europe and made hundreds of millions of dollars. And they had their own fleet of ships called the Black Ships. And the flag that they flew was the Jolly Roger, the Skull and Bones. Mm-hmm. And you can see this Black Ship in a movie with Richard Chamberlain in it many years ago, and where they're control of the silk trade and the pearl trade out of the Far East. And they were the largest shippers, second only to the English in their shipping, or the Portuguese at the time. And so they had their ships, and so they perfected communism and also cartel capitalism, which is why the monopoly capitalists work together with the communists. So, and a book that proves that is called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Anthony Sutton, where he shows that Wall Street, run by the Knights of Malta, and 120 Broad Street, financed the Bolshevik Revolution. So communism and cartel capitalism work together. And the Jews, they use Jews up front for this, but the ones that behind it are the Jesuits and the papacy that the Jesuits want to bring to universal world power. So no, communism is a work of the Jesuits. R.W. Thompson says it in his chapter on Paraguay, that these reductions were run pursuant to what we know today as socialist communism. And he says it right in his book in 1894, I believe. So no, the Jesuits are the masters of communism. All the maxims of communism come right out of canon law, and how the different orders and priesthoods were run, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. But they had to pin this on the Jews, so Peter Becks, who later became the Jesuit general, tutored Karl Marx in the British Museum for many years in the writing of the Communist Manifesto. So Marx was tutored by a Jesuit, and that's according to the great German who was the advisor to Kaiser Wilhelm II, Otto von Bismarck. So Bismarck said Becks tutored Marx. So they're the masters of communism. They're the masters of fascism. So it's just two different faces on the same coin, because as I show in my book, Hitler worked with Stalin for the entire duration of the war. And Hitler would also be backed by American cartel capitalists with a Dawes plan, just like Stalin would be backed by American cartel capitalists like Henry Ford. So Ford backed Hitler, Ford backed Stalin. So they all work together. Well, meanwhile, the papacy is saying, well, the communists are enemy and not necessarily the Nazis. So the papacy would come out on the side of the Nazis, but against the communism, which is secretly the real power of the papacy, were through the Jesuits, because the Jesuits were readmitted into Russia in 1922 after they had been expelled from Russia for over 100 years by the great and good Alexander I, who was the Tsar. So if they're readmitted in 1922, according to the great work Descent into Darkness by James Zatko, who was a teacher at Notre Dame, if they're readmitted in 1922, then don't you think the Bolsheviks were run by the Jesuits who readmitted them, like Lenin and Stalin and the others? So this is this deadly web that they have weaved, and they do not want us to perceive its real essence, which is why they control academia and the television.
Wow. That's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it.
Yeah.
And then they have the fall guys, like he says, which a lot of times they like to use these Jewish guys, so it looks like a Jewish conspiracy. Like,
of course,
with that, you'll hear, oh, well, Lenin and Trotsky and Marx, they were all Jewish. It's a Jewish conspiracy.
Sure, they were. Well, they were, but they were also Jewish Freemasons. So we can't leave out the fact that it's either Grand Orient or B'nai B'rith Jewish Freemasonry, like Chuck Schumer. He's a Jew serving the Pope. He's B'nai B'rith. And there are many others. Henry Kissinger, when he was alive, that evil, wicked Jew, was a Knight of Malta, personal friend of Jack Valenti, who was a Knight of Malta. And Kissinger said about Nixon, I would never work for that man. Why, of course he never did. He was busy working for the Jesuits at Georgetown. Yeah. Just remember that. Remember, the Jesuits are the masters of the country through Georgetown University. Georgetown is the capital of the United States of America. And the White House, through the vaginal Oval Office, is the place where the Jesuits bring all their legislation to sign, and then they're introduced in the Congress and so on.
Wow. So the Jesuits are even, which obviously, I just never thought of that, but so they're writing legislation too.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
They have the Viet Diem, who is a Roman Catholic of Vietnamese and a knight, was writing for the Jesuits of Georgetown University to write the Patriot Act. So they do. So the Jesuits use their agents at Georgetown and probably some other universities to write these acts. The congressmen don't write anything.
Hey, Eric, I wanted to mention to you, this was something I think is important, and I caught, and I never heard anyone mention, but, the Supreme Court, right? People like, well, there's 3 Jews, but I found out that, it's filled with Roman Catholics. Now, the last one I remember was the big story was, you remember the guy Bart Kavanaugh?
Yep.
The one who, the sexual assault. I don't know if Ricardo and David, if you guys remember that, the Bart, when Trump was trying to get the guy on the Supreme Court, but he supposedly raped a girl or something like that.
Yeah.
You guys remember that vaguely? I was watching that. I happened to be watching that one day, Eric, live, and during it, in his defense, he talked about how he was trained as a Jesuit.
I saw that.
Yeah, he was trained.
And how he used to, they trained him to keep a diary. So this diary was proof that he wasn't there on the day that it happened because of his Jesuit, being raised as a Jesuit.
Yeah,
and I couldn't.
That's right.
Yeah, so you guys.
He was educated.
I wanted.
That's right. I believe that little woman was lying, but she did it to create sympathy for him that he would be appointed to the court. So, and all the 3 justices that Trump appointed, all of them Roman Catholics. And got Neil Gorsuch. I got a picture of Gorsuch with behind him is a portrait of Ignatius Loyola. So, so there, and then the other woman that he appointed from Notre Dame, what's her name? Coney Bryant, something like that. I can't remember.
Coney Barrett.
So they're all Roman Catholics, and so the purpose was to continue to pack the court with Roman Catholics. So I believe they have 7 Catholics and 2 Jews on it right now. And so but the Jews are also subject to the Archbishop of New York. So it's a completely and totally controlled Supreme Court by way of the Jesuits of Georgetown. And they are told what cases they can hear. Because remember, every case that comes before the Supreme Court has to come up on what's called a writ of certiorari. And so they have the ability to decide which cases they want to hear and which cases they don't want to hear. And I'm convinced the Jesuits of Georgetown tell them you're going to hear this case and you're not going to hear this case. And any of you justices that get out of order like Scalia, we're going to kill you. So he was murdered, and he didn't have an autopsy, and his son, who was a priest, helped to cover everything up. So they have this power of maintaining order among the men that they put in places of political power to keep their kingdom. I call their kingdom, it's the Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment socialist communist American empire that's been in place since March 9th, 1933, when the president FDR ousted the civilian government and imposed an emergency war powers military government, which is why you see a military flag in every courtroom, in every hotel, in every bank, in every public school. They're all flying military colors, meaning we're under military government temporarily.
Is that with the yellow fringe around it, you mean?
Yellow fringe on 3 sides, as defined by Army Regulation 840-10. And they also have gold cords with tassels at the end. That's also indicating military color. So we're under emergency war powers military government, and therefore the jurisdiction of all the courts are military jurisdictions, federal jurisdiction that is military. There's no state, there is no federal civilian due process at law since the Erie decision of 1938. And so what they've done is they've created the foundation. So when they want to impose martial law out of their Proclamation 2040, when they impose military government with FDR, then all the courts are in place to take out all the enemy belligerents through their courts, and they have their mobile guillotines, they have their black coffins, they have everything in place with their 600 FEMA death camps to put it in place, which is what they wanted to do for probably 100 years. This is all a Jesuit mass conspiracy intended to destroy what was once white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Western civilization, the end of the modern era, the reinstitution of the Dark Ages, which is the New Age movement, and is the New World Order, and that the Pope would be ruling all nations once again, as he did in the Dark Ages.
Right.
So I got a question. So we're talking about the power of the Jesuit order and stuff. And can you go into or know about the history of, starting with Ignatius Loyola and how they actually gained so much power and control over the years, and like how you're saying they get away with murder and assassinations, and it's covered up or redirected, and how have they been able to build such a powerful order that's seemingly untouchable? And what's crazy is a lot of Christians today, they don't even know what a Jesuit is. Like they've just gone completely under the radar.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. The Jesuits are started, the Jesuit order. It goes back to the suppression of the Knights Templars. Remember the Knights Templars for a couple hundred years, which was a crusading order for the Pope. They ruled all finances in the known world, from Goa to the Far East, to Japan, to China, to India, to Europe. They were the master men of commerce. They are the ones who really originated paper.
International banking.
International banking, thank you. And so when in 1312, after the Templars were suppressed by the Pope and Philip the Fair of France, they went underground. And so they went underground primarily to Scotland and other countries, but primarily Scotland. So they're going to build Rosalind Chapel there. If you guys have never seen it, you need to go and see it. Very evil, very occult, very demonic. So the Knights Templars stay underground until the Reformation takes place and the Pope starts losing his political power over the nations, the Northern European nations, in particular Europe. And so what happens is that Ignatius Loyola seeks to revive the Knights Templars because he's a Spanish Aragon Templar. He seeks to revive the Knights Templars, but he's going to do it under another name. And so he visits certain of his lords. By the way, Loyola was not a Jew. He was a Spanish Gentile, okay? Because all the Jew baiters are going to try to blame him for being a Jew, and he wasn't. I mean, there were Jews in the order like Polenco and Diego Lainez and some others, but they were all expelled from the order in 1593 when the Jesuits wrote into their constitutions that they can have no Jew in the order. And that remained in effect until 1946, by the way. So Loyola, he founds the Jesuit order. And by the way, there's a book called Rome Stoops to Conquer, where it shows you that the Loyola absolutely hated the Jews, and that the Jews are not allowed in the order at the time when Boyd Barrett wrote the book, which was in the 1930s. But Rome Stoops to Conquer and Jesuit Enigma were two great works by an ex-Jesuit, Boyd Barrett. I recommend you guys get them and read them. But so what we have is the Jesuits are started, and their whole purpose is twofold. The first being to end the Protestant Reformation. That means end the Bible in the hands of the common man with in the common language.
Right.
And then the next thing is they're to restore the nations of Europe back to the political power called the temporal power of the Pope. And that's represented with a silver key on the Pope's flag. There's a gold key for his spiritual power and a silver key for his temporal political power. And by the way, at NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland, you see a silver key being clutched by an eagle. And the NSA will tell you that silver key represents Peter's power of binding and loosing. So the silver key represents the Pope's temporal power. So the purpose of NSA is to restore temporal power of the Pope around the world and to maintain it. So the Jesuits are set up to restore the Pope's temporal power, to fight down the Protestant Reformation, as said by Thomas Sherman, who was the son of General Burn-em-up Sherman that pillaged and plundered the South. His son would become a very powerful Jesuit and would be an advisor to Theodore Roosevelt. So they were intended to destroy the Reformation, and then they would also purpose to restore Jerusalem to the papacy. And so that's why Loyola goes to Jerusalem, and he wants to take Jerusalem from the Muslims, and the Franciscans are there, send him back. So that's when he goes back to Europe and he studies Latin with the young boys, and then he's going to start the Jesuit order. But his purpose was to set up the capital for the Jesuits in Jerusalem. And so you can read about this in Wiley's work, History of Protestantism, Volume 2, about chapter 15. He devotes about 50 pages to the Jesuits, and I put all 50 of those pages in my CD. That's the rare book CD in my Vatican Assassins work. So that's their purpose. It's twofold. Well, the Jesuits are then responsible for causing all the wars in Europe, according to Marquis de Lafayette. He says all the wars in Europe were caused by the Jesuits. And he says, and if there's any group that will destroy America, it will be those wily Jesuits. They will destroy your country, George Washington. By the way, George Washington was no Jesuit. He was no Jesuit coadjutor. He was a low-level Freemason. He went into the Masonic Lodge once or twice during the last 30 years of his life, according to his own letters, quoted by Charles Finney, who was the greatest evangelist of the 1800s. Okay?
He was a Calvinist too, right?
That's right. Washington was baptized by a Baptist Calvinist preacher, minister, who happened to be a major in the army, and his favorite chaplain, John Gano. And according to Grady, William P. Grady's work, How Satan Turns America Against God, he shows the picture, a portrait of George Washington being baptized by Gano, and that portrait's on display at Jewell College in Missouri, and also is George Washington's battle sword that he gave to John Gano. Okay.
Wow.
So it's a remarkable. So Washington was a Baptist and a Calvinist, and he left the Episcopalian Church, and he never became a Roman Catholic on his deathbed, as that lie is being told by F. Tupper Saucy and that lying work of his called Rulers of Evil. That lie came out in 1951. Prior to that, there's no historical record of Washington ever being baptized by a Catholic priest on his deathbed. So anyway, you have the Jesuits seeking to, and they want to bastardize our history. They want to bastardize our historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant history, because white men with the Bible in one hand and a gun in the other, led by patriotic leaders, broke the political temporal power of Rome. And those are men like Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, the good and godly king there who saved the German nation from being overrun by the papists of France and southern Germany in the 30 Years' War. The Jesuits had started the 30 Years' War and ran from 1618 to 1648. And after 1648, with the end of the 30 Years' War, where you have the Treaty of Westphalia, you have the saving of the Protestant Reformation in Germany. And by the way, Joseph Goebbels, who was the minister of propaganda during the Nazi Third Reich, he was trained by Jesuits in the Rhineland. He said, one of our purposes is to alter the boundaries as set forth by the Treaty of Westphalia. And that would be a remarkable book for somebody to write, to show how the boundaries as a result of the 30 Years' War were pretty much destroyed by the Third Reich. So therefore, the Third Reich is a religious crusade. It's not just against the Jews. It's against the Protestants as well as the Jews, as well as anybody that the Jesuits want to get rid of out of Europe to revive the Holy Roman Empire, as Martin Lee talks about in his book, The Beast Reawakens. So we have the Jesuits are set out to do this, so they caused the Spanish Fury, they caused the revolution under Cromwell by the persecution of Charles I. And so you have the Puritans rising up to resist political tyranny. You have the champions of political liberty, who are the Puritans. Without the Calvinistic Puritans, you have no written constitutions. You have no freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. The Puritans made it possible. The classic work on the Puritans is called The Puritans by Neal, Neal. And it shows all the battles that they were involved in. And of course, the American Revolution was started in Puritan, Massachusetts by Sam Adams and the great shipper at the time, John Hancock. Without those two Puritan Calvinists, there would be no American Revolution, and hence we would have been absorbed back into the British Empire run by the Jesuits since King George III. And so that's what they wanted. But anyway, the Jesuits were busy seeking to cause all these wars in Europe, and they were suppressed. They tried to take over Japan with the leading Jesuits who went in there, Francis Xavier, and they wanted to conquer Japan and then use Japan to take over China, which is what they did somewhat in World War II when they used Japan to conquer China and go into Manchuria. So they're seeking to establish a complete and total conquering of the world and to restore the world then to the Pope of their making, the Pope of their control. Well, what happens is they become so powerful that in the 1700s, they try to assassinate the King of Portugal. And so the king, his right-hand man, was Carvalho de Pompeu. He issues the suppression of the Jesuits, expulsion from the Jesuits out of Roman Catholic Portugal. And he ends it, Yo del Rey, I, the king, have spoken it. And so the king of Portugal expels all the Jesuits out of Portugal, expels them out of all their holdings in South America, which means the Jesuits are going to lose their reductions, which they've been making millions and millions upon with their black ships. The next king king before them is going to expel them. The next king is the king of France, Louis XV. Well, Louis XV has his concubine, Madame de Pompadour, who hates the Jesuits. And so she's involved in helping him and encouraging him to kick the Jesuits out of France. Well, Madame de Pompadour now is hated by the Jesuits. And so that's why when you're initiated in Skull and Bones, in Yale, one of the things they do is they kiss, they abhor Madame de Pompadour. And they kiss the slipper toe of the Pope, which is part of the ritual. So the Jesuits are then going to seek to assassinate King Louis XV, which they fail, and Madame de Pompadour, but they're expelled out of France and all the French holdings. And then 1867, they're expelled from Spain. Now, Spain is probably the largest shipping nation in the world. It has huge holdings in South America. And the Jesuits are expelled from all these holdings by a very intriguing design. The king of Spain, in deciding to expel them out of all of his provinces, sends sealed packets to all of his viceroys. And the viceroy, when the packet arrives, there's a note that says, you will open this on such and such a day, such and such a time, and such a week of a month. If you open this before this time, you will be executed. So all these viceroys are wondering what's going on here, So on the day and the hour that it arrives, like 8 o'clock in the evening, they open up their packets, and there it is. The king with his signature on the order tells them, you will round up every Jesuit in your dominion, in your province. You will take them to the large port there in Buenos Aires. You will load them on our ships. They had some 200 ships waiting to receive all the Jesuits, a couple thousand Jesuits they were rounding up. And they put them on the ships, and they were sending them back to Civitavecchia there in Italy. And so that's how they expelled all the Jesuits out of South America when the king of Spain did this. So now you got the Jesuits. They're the enemies of the king of Spain. powerful Roman Catholic Empire. The Jesuits are the enemies of the King of Portugal, powerful Roman Catholic Empire. And they're the enemies of the King of France, powerful Roman Catholic Empire, even though you used to have lots of Huguenots there that have been expelled in 1685. But you have three major Roman Catholic monarchs that are expelling the Jesuits. And then the Jesuits would also be expelled from Austria with the Habsburgs there, with Maria Theresa. So you have these powerful Roman Catholic monarchs kicking the Jesuits out of their countries. And they're now demanding that the Pope suppress them. So the Pope, after a 4-year investigation, Pope Clement XIII, on the night before he was to suppress them, was poisoned. And all the Italian people there in Italy said, this is a work of the Jesuits. So the kings then got together and had another pope put in power. His name was Ganglionelli, and he was a Franciscan. And the Franciscans were enemies at the time with the Jesuits, vying for power. And so Ganglionelli, after another 4-year investigation, and at the behest of those Catholic kings, he suppresses the Jesuit order with a papal bull, Dominic Ac Redemptor Noster, in 1773. Well, this will be the end of Pope Clement XIV. They will poison him. And there was a lady, a peasant lady that came in with the Pope's favorite food called figs, and they were laced with poison, a poison called aketa. And you can read about this in Greisinger's great work, The History of the Jesuits as Told to the German People, written in 1872. And so she poisoned him. She probably doesn't even know that she was used to do this. And Ganglionelli gets very, very sick, and he's going to wane for months in this slow poison. And he said, alas, I knew they would poison me, but I did not know they would do it in so slow and cruel a manner. It turns out that he's going to die. His skin is going to turn black. His hair is going to fall out. His fingernails are going to fall out. And they go to perform an autopsy, and they pull out his intestines. The intestines smelled so bad, they were fermented so bad that they put them in a box. And so they put these intestines in a box, and later to come back the next day to continue the autopsy. When the box exploded because of all the fumes in it and put a horrible, terrible odor throughout the room where they were performing the autopsy. So they decided that the Pope is not going to have an open casket. And so they sewed him back up. They had a no open casket, and they paraded the closed casket around and then buried him. So this is the notorious murder of Pope Clement XIV, who had the courage enough to suppress the Jesuits with a papal bull. And so the Jesuits went underground. And what did they do? They found the Bavarian Illuminati 3 years later in 1776. The Jesuits will be the masters of the Illuminati. There won't be one Jew in the Illuminati. A particular book I go by find later. Okay? Not one Jew. And by the way, the guy that got me the book was my first Black American freeman that I taught to have his citizenship restored. And he got me the book. The book is $450. You can get a reprint, but it's a very, very important book written by J. Feinlater. And he shows that there's not one Jew in the Illuminati at this time. So the Jesuits found the Illuminati. It will be their means by which they will raise up the men that they'll control to punish the kings, the Catholic monarchs of Europe. And hence what we now have is called the French Revolution. The Jesuits will totally run the French Revolution. They're the masters of the guillotine through that Freemason Dr. Guillotine who designed it. And they will be in charge of cutting off the head of thousands of their enemies during the French Revolution. They will take the Dominican priests that took the Inquisition from them, and they will emasculate them and leave them dying in the streets of Paris to put fear and terror in the hearts of the priests for the Jacobins. And the Jacobins were absolutely run by the Jesuits like Robespierre and others. So they'll have their bloodthirsty French Revolution that was communism. And by the way, any true historian of the Bolshevik Revolution will tell you whoever started the French Revolution started the Bolshevik Revolution. And so they will punish the Catholic people of France, and they will kill tens of thousands of French Roman Catholics known as the Vendée, because they would side with the Pope against the Jesuits. So after this slaughter in the French Revolution, They're going to get rid of Robespierre after they finish using him because the Jesuits educated him. And then they're going to bring Napoleon to power. Well, where does Napoleon come to power? He comes to power from Corsica. And the Jesuits had taken over Corsica. So they used Napoleon Bonaparte to be their avenger, to punish the monarchs of Europe with his massive army that is composed of many nationalists who are against the altar and the throne. But little do they know they're fighting for the Jesuits and punishing the monarchs who had expelled the Jesuits. Okay? So the Jesuits are going to be protected by King George III. So he takes them in. And so they're going to have their war with England, with Great Britain and France. And Napoleon will be the great avenger. And after they...
Every photo you see of Napoleon, he's got the hidden hand.
That's right, because he's a French Freemason. And the Jesuits are running Freemasonry.
So I'm trying to understand the difference here. And I'd say a lot of people in the audience might. So what's the difference between the type of Freemason that Napoleon was and these Jesuits?
Well, the Jesuits were the controllers of Freemasonry on the continent, as well as they controlled English Freemasonry too. They got control of that. So because once you get control of that secret society, and you can control both sides of anything. And remember, the Jesuits are the authors of Scottish Rite. They authored every rite from the 4th degree to the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. In fact, one individual in a book I have that was given to me, one of my former associates, showed the Jesuits even wrote the first 3 degrees of Blue Lodge Freemasonry. So through even though there were many good Freemasons in the American Revolution, there was no Scottish Rite Freemasonry that should have been penetrated by the Jesuit Illuminati, especially through their lodge in New York, of which Horace Greeley was a member later on, during the war between the states. So they control Freemasonry. I mean, Freemasonry is about bringing the final Pope of Rome to the power through the rite of Hiram Abiff. Hiram Abiff is going in to become a master mason, or the mason is to become a master mason, so he has to go through this rite of Hiram Abiff. And he has 3 ruffians hit him over the head with little mallets, and he pretends that he's dying. And then the worshipful master extends his hand, the lion's grip, and then he whispers in his ear, Maha Bone, which is the secret of the great architect of the universe. And then all of a sudden, the guy comes back to life. And this is a parable of the final Pope of Rome to be slain with a sword, to rise from the dead, to be the Antichrist, the beast of Revelation 13, verse 14. And so this is what they're all looking for. This is about Easter. The Easter is about the rising of the final Pope of Rome from the dead. It has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. It's a pagan holiday out of Babylon, looking for a slain Pope rising from the dead to be the Antichrist. So the Jesuits are working to that end. Meanwhile, we're conducting all these wars, controlling both sides, particularly Napoleon. They're going to humble Russia. Napoleon's going to burn Moscow, which is an Orthodox city, a heretic Orthodox city. He's going to fight with the...
Didn't he take the Pope off the throne? Wasn't there a thing where Napoleon took...
Pope Pius VI, he took him off the throne. One of his General Berthier took him off the throne. And by the way, when General Berthier took him off the throne, and this is according to a work I have, Popery, Puseyism, and Jesuitism by Luigi de Santis, what they found on the papal chair is they turned it upside down. They turned the seat upside down, and they found written in Arabic, there is one God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet.
What?
That's underneath the Pope's throne. That's right. You can find it. Popery, Puseyism, and Jesuitism by Luigi de Santis, written in like 1873. And Lady Morgan is the one that showed this. One God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. The papacy runs Sunni Islam. Okay, that's why the Sunni Islam leaders come to visit the Pope, because they know they've been made rich by the Knights of Malta with their oil enterprise, the largest commercial enterprise ever taking place in 1934, when that deal was made with the Knights of Malta here in America, the oil men, the leaders of the Sunni Islam in Arabia, in Saudi Arabia, which becomes Saudi Arabia in 1932. So they have built Sunni Islam. They have built Dubai. They have built Abu Dhabi. That's the Pope's playground for his knights. But they can't stand the Shia. So that's why we see a war against the Shia. No matter how many Sunnis have to die, they're going to destroy Shia Islam, because that comes out of Ali, when Muhammad dies and many Muslims follow Ali. Well, that's Shia Islam. Shias are not allowed to go to Mecca. They're not allowed to go to Medina. They're regarded as infidels. So that's why the American military has been used to destroy the Shia in Iraq. And it's soon to go probably in Iran. They're going to destroy all Shia Islam using the American military, which is why they started this war in Gaza, which is why you have Netanyahu working with the leader of Hamas in Qatar. They all work together for the purpose of having a huge war to destroy the Dome of the Rock and the Alaska Mosque on the Temple Mount, which I think is a great idea, so that the third temple will be built. That's what's going to happen. I maintain this is not going to stop anytime soon. But you always have to remember the Jewish people living in Israel, they are not represented by their government. Their government hates them. Their government's run by the Pope of Rome through Jewish Freemasons like Netanyahu, I call him Nitwit Yahoo, and others. It's the end of the papacy. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Jesuits, by the way, so they conduct all these wars, and at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, they're restored with the Congress of Vienna. And then in the Secret Treaty of Verona, they conspire to destroy the United States of America as a heretic nation. And so it's one conspiracy after another to do that, the assassination of our presidents, and then ultimately getting us into World War I, which was a violation of the Monroe Doctrine, and then getting involved in the affairs of foreign nations, which George Washington said not to do in his farewell address, remembering that his farewell address is America's greatest state paper. And so with that, now you start to have Roman Catholic Jesuit foreign policy of intervention in the foreign nations, when Protestant Bible-based foreign policy is isolationism. And so then it just begins to unwind. And here we are today with the Jesuits in control of communist Russia, because the State Department put Mao in power in 1949. You can read about this in certain of the John Birch Society works. The Jesuits run the Birchers, but they're still right about that Mao was put in power by the Jesuits. And there was a certain individual that discovered that Mao was a priest. And so he published, that makes perfect sense, that Spellman would put Mao in power. And what does he do? Mao expels all the Protestant missionaries out of China. And so it's going to be the beginning of the building of the kings of the East of Revelation 16, where Japan and Taiwan and Vietnam, all the Asian countries will be under the banner of the Red Chinese, the kings of the East. And I maintain they were going to use this huge force in the invasion of America, which I spoke of in my 25 years ago. I call it the Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion. The Jesuits run the Chinese communists. They run the USSR, which is deceptively called the Russian Federation. And they run the Muslims. They run the Sunni Islam. So they're going to, when they blow up the Dome of the Rock and the Alaska Mosque, and when the Muslim Masons do that, they're going to blame America for it. And I told a Muslim man this many years ago, and he said, "No, Allah would never allow that." And I said, "Well, it's going to happen, and you need to think about it out here." Okay. And then he got a real serious look on his face, and he said, "If that would happen, we would teach our children to hate and kill every American we could find till we kill them all."
Wow.
That's what he said to me. And I said, "I know it." So that's what they're.
I know, that's why they're going to do it.
That's why Obama, working for the Jesuits, Greg Galuzzo, brought all those Muslims over to Minnesota, a historic white Protestant town. That's why they brought them into, what is it?
They're still bringing in all these refugees, these Muslims, and they're like men in war age.
That's right. And of course, they're not refugees; they're invaders. And if the military government would obey the Constitution, they would repel an invasion and not facilitate it.
Well, there's a bunch in Dearborn, Michigan, or something like that, right?
Dearborn.
They like have their own little city over there that the cops won't even go by.
The cops won't even go, just like Birmingham. Same exact thing. But remember, guys, this is all done to outrage primarily the white men in this country, to drive the white Catholics, the white apostate white Protestants, the white Baptists, and all the white atheists, to drive all the white men together in this new right. And when they come to power, it's going to be
with Trump.
Trump, not Trump, it's going to be somebody like him. And I said for years, they're going to bring the guy to power here. He's not going to be a Catholic. They're going to use a Protestant, which Trump is a nominal Protestant. He's going to be a high-level Freemason. He's going to be an alpha male. He's going to be absolutely tied in with the Archbishop of New York, and Trump's all these things.
Yeah, he is.
They prepared him for this at Fordham for 2 years, and then Wharton School of Economics. They prepared him for this. And the big developer he was in New York, recovering from bankruptcy, 3 or 4 times. You don't recover from bankruptcy unless you got a papal knight or the group of them in New York helping you.
Yep.
So Trump himself is a 33rd Scottish Rite Freemasonry. He shows the equilateral triangle on the Trump Towers where the trees are planted. So he is their baby, and Trump loves Biden. Everything Biden does facilitates his power.
Yeah.
And we white men are being played for suckers to follow him.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So that's why I advocate racial separation and nationhood. I don't hate anybody. I believe black men. I've defended their right to have their own country here. I've defended them to have the entire state of New Jersey. I should give the entire state to them, the airports, the railroads, the farms, give it all to the black people. They can have their own nation. I was at the first conspiracy conference in 2002. I got a couple of big black guys come up to me. He said, "You Eric Phelps?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "There's a lot of people listening to you in New Jersey." So I have advocated that they have their own nation. So anyway, I advocate that white men that believe the Bible, that we need to have our own nation. We don't hate anybody. We just have our right to our own destiny, to our own language, to our own history. And we're the inventors of the vast majority of things over the last 400 years. And so we have a right to preserve our people, our race, our language, our culture, so that can be continuing. Not that we hate anybody. Because as you know, you listen to the broadcast, I don't hate anybody. I'm a racialist. I believe God created the races to separate mankind so that that's the best economy for man and sin. We have to be racially separated first by race and then language and culture and by nation. Each nation has their own boundaries. So the Jesuits don't want this. So it's forced miscegenation, forced race mixing, forced language mixing to have a complete nondescript population that cannot unite around any common history or culture to resist the Jesuit order or the armies they're going to bring against us, because the Russian army isn't race mixed. It isn't nation mixed. It isn't language mixed. The Chinese army is not race mixed or language mixed, and the Muslims are not either. So they're going to bring in these guys, and to expect us to fight them when they get here is going to be an impossibility if this particular Jesuit design continues in this country. So that's where they are right now, for the final destruction of historic Protestant Reformation nations of Canada and the United States, and to the end of bringing up a new right, a two-front war, losing the two-front war. Whatever they did in Germany, they're going to do right here. Exact same repeat.
Yep.
So, but we have something going in America the Germans didn't have, and that means we have certain preachers that are going to expose us, and we don't care whether we live or die. And there will be certain men who will rise up who will tell the truth about the Jesuit order and their tremendous power in this country with their 28 universities, and how they're controlling the political parties. And you get the Jesuit connection to all these people, which George Widger is so good in bringing out, and you can see how they run their empire. So once they're exposed seriously by some men of power and financial wealth, I believe things will change, because it takes men of power and financial wealth to make a change. That's why the American Revolution ultimately was a success. Men of the founding fathers lost their entire fortunes. All the ships of John Hancock were swept from the seas by the British Navy, but they were all willing to make that sacrifice just to separate from the Jesuit-ruled British Empire and have a limited little republic where they could be free. And that's what I advocate too.
Wow. Eric's something, huh, man? Oh man, you're a legend, Eric. The knowledge you have is, it's so important to us.
Yeah. I'm super impressed, Eric. Very impressed. One thing I want to ask, because I'm sure you know, why did Napoleon, if he was a Freemason, why did he dethrone, or you know what I mean? Why did he go to war with the Pope? If he,
Okay, here's why. The Pope was the enemy of the Jesuits.
The Pope, at that time,
the Pope had suppressed them at this time. So that means the Jesuits lost the Vatican Empire. They lost all the schools, all the churches, all of it, because it's an international Vatican Empire. They were deprived of it because they were running it. And so now here they lost the Vatican Empire. So now we have to get the Vatican Empire back. So we can't really stop the American Revolution. We'll deal with that American heretic white nation when we're done getting our power back with the Vatican Empire, which they got in 1814. So then they would launch against us with the War of 1812, just before 1814, to try to get the colonies back. But they failed, thank God. Some supernatural things that happened. But the Jesuits were enemies of the papacy. And so the Jesuits were formally suppressed. So their underground is the Illuminati and other secret societies. So they will use their secret society of the Illuminati and certain Freemasonry that's controlled by the Illuminati to wage war on the papacy. And that's why they took Pius VI captive. That's why Berthier, a French general, took him prisoner and took him over the Alps, and he died on the trip over the Alps. So the Pope that comes to power after that is Pius VII. Well, what happens to him? The Jesuits, running Napoleon through his advisor, Abbé Sieyès, he was the second on the three-man consulate, he advised him to capture the Pope. So the Jesuits use Napoleon to capture Pius VII, and he's a prisoner of Napoleon for 5 years. And so Pius VII is told, we will restore you in the papacy, but you're going to be controlled by us. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to restore the Jesuit order once we restore you to the papacy. So what do the Jesuits do? They use King George III to rescue Pius VII and bring him back to Rome so he can restore the Jesuit order in 1814. Meanwhile, the Jesuits had already been restored in Russia by Pius VII in 1901 or 1801, and they're going to be restored in America under Jefferson in 1805. So Thomas Jefferson will permit the reestablishment of the Jesuits in America in 1805, which shows you at the time he was working for the Jesuits via the Illuminati. He will change. Yeah. He will change his mind, for which reason he will be poisoned. But that's what happened while the Jesuits with Napoleon and Freemasonry, Continental, it's called Continental Freemasonry, what the French had, that they will wage war on the papacy. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Man, that's
that's a lot to digest.
It's a lot. It's a lot. What were you saying, Ricardo?
No, I just said that's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
I have a lot of this in my book, so you can kind of just take your time.
Yeah.
Look at the different quotations and the pictures and stuff. So, it'll take.
I mean, and you give names, dates. I mean, you got so much evidence.
That's what I'm saying. You're like
awesome.
That's like what I got. You gotta have it. You gotta have names and dates, guys, and so not just stabbing out in the dark. You can pinpoint individuals, what they did, what they said, and you have a book or whatever to quote what you say. Your books are your most important weapons, not your guns. Your books teach you how to use your guns. So grab best weapons, which are your books.
Yeah, I agree. So
amazing.
I know you know this one. Can you, for the audience, I've read it before and I've heard it. It's been a while, but for our audience, can you quote the Jesuit oath that they swear when they come in?
Yes, I can. You ready?
This is intense, guys. If you've never heard what the Jesuit oath is, you just wait.
Oh, it's gruesome.
It really is.
Yeah. Super sinister too. I mean, you can just feel the evilness from you can just sense how evil it is.
Yeah, and just.
I have it in several books here. I put it in my book, Vatican Assassins.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it in here.
Of course, when I need it, I can't find it. But anyway, it's called The Devil in Robes. It was written in 1901, and he gives the whole oath in it. It takes a little while to read, but the gist of it is that they will become all things to all men. This is the Jesuit oath of the fourth vow. It's called the Oath of Extreme Induction. Only the Jesuits of the fourth vow take it. And they essentially say that when we cannot make war openly, we'll make war secretly. against all heretics and liberals and their monarchs and their leaders, and we will assassinate them using the poison cup, the steel of the poignard, which is a knife, the strangulation cord, and the leaden bullet. And I have a picture of a guy that sent to me that's a box of one of these Jesuit assassins, and they had a crucifix in it with a gun, with a strangulation cord, a knife, and a poison, because the Jesuits are masters of poisoning. They taught the CIA proper poisoning. So they're masters of the poison cup. So the Jesuits will do that against any of their enemies. And like I said, they killed 14 American presidents, and they'll kill any political leader that is their enemy. And they ran the anarchists in 1800s, and they killed 50 heads of state during the 1800s. And I have that in a particular book. So they killed their own Roman Catholic kings if they resist them. They killed King Victor Emmanuel II of Italy, who became the king of Italy in 1870. They killed his son Umberto. They're the ones responsible for the confining of the Indian nations to reservations in this country after the war between the states, when they conducted their War of the Great Plains. Because if we're going to have an empire from sea to shining sea, we have to neutralize the Indian nations. And that's what the Jesuits did using Pierre de Smet. If you want to see Pierre de Smet, you got to go to Gonzaga University. They got a big statue of him out there. You can see him. He was a chaplain in the Yankee Union Army, and he advised General Sheridan at the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, which was the beginning of the plunder of the Indian nations. You always have to remember, before the war between the states, the Indian nations were treated well. After the war, they are plundered. And that's when you have all the Irish Catholics and other coming out with the buffalo hunters and killing and destroying the entire buffalo herds, because we got to starve the Indian nations to death. That was done by the papacy. So you always have to see what's the papal hand in all of this. And so the Jesuits are behind killing of whole nations, whole peoples, as well as killing or assassinating their leaders. And all of this is pursuant to the Jesuit oath of the fourth vow, which Nat Hendhoff, a Jew in New York, poo-hooed when he wrote the book, John Cardinal Connor. He said, there's no such thing as the oath. Well, I found the oath in 6 different sources, and it's in my book, Vatican Assassins. So if you want to read the full oath, then I guess you're doomed to get a copy of my book.
Yeah. Hey, well, I have a little like a little summary of it right here too, and I'll just read a little piece of it. And it says, I do furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war secretly or openly against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to, extirpate them from the face of the earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive those infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of the women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls in order
That's what the Croatian Ustashi did to the Orthodox during World War II. They cut those women open. They yanked their babies out of their womb. They would put their feet and walk inside, destroying those women. They would do that to them. And when the Einsatzgruppen, the 4 Einsatzgruppen, ABCD, of the SS went into Russia, they would take those little Jewish children and bash their heads against the wall. And the author that you can read about this in Heinz Honey's work, Order of the Death's Head, said it was like it was a pop. It's like a tire blowing out. The Einsatzgruppen were all Catholics, leaders that were Catholics, busy killing the Jews and Gypsies when they would go into Russia. This was all pursuant to the Jesuit oath and the Council of Trent.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
It even says here that when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisonous cup, the strangulating cords, the steels of the poignard,
the poignard. That's a knife. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah. Or the leaden bullets, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed to by any agent of the Pope. So you're like what we were talking about, like it doesn't matter if you're a president, if it doesn't matter.
Not
like
at all.
They'll do it.
Not at all. Once they get an order, remember the Jesuit assassins are in the CIA as well as mafia.
Mm.
All the big mafia families, their assassins are absolutely subject to the Jesuit order because the Jesuits control the Bonanos, the Luchesis, the Gambinos, all of those families, and they would not be there unless the Jesuits wanted them there. So CIA, the mafia was before the CIA. So as we know in the Kennedy assassination, they worked together. So the mafia has their assassins, the CIA has their assassins, so does the FBI. And so they all are under orders ultimately with their superior, that when their superior gets the order from a Jesuit provincial, that they will then go ahead and carry it out, because the Black Pope, the Jesuit general, has his American assistant. The American assistant is over 4 provincials of this country. The 4 provincials run this country, and they oversee the princes of the church, all the archbishops here, and they don't do anything apart from being directed by the Jesuits and their presidents of their 28 universities. It's a military empire with military orders, and they never, ever disobey an order.
Wow. What happens if they disobey an order in the oath? What happens to them?
So if they disobey an order, they will be disciplined, maybe even killed. It's a military operation. You cannot have your subordinates disobeying orders. That's why a commanding officer can kill you. If you
Like court martial, right?
Court martial or outright kill you, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
So you don't have an organized military unless you have that kind of power in officers.
Right.
Right. Last time I've read the Jesuit oath, I think that was in there. Something about if they, tell their secrets or disobey, they will pull out their tongue.
That's the Masonic Lodge. That's the Masonic Lodge.
Oh, okay.
See,
okay.
and all those rites in the Masonic Lodge, I will rip out their tongue by the roots, or will cut out their heart and burn it to ashes and scatter to the 4 winds of heaven. Should you never conceal and never reveal the secrets of Freemasonry. So that's exactly right. That's what all these oaths are about. And so in the protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, the Jesuits who wrote the protocols, and not the Jews never wrote that. Layman's work, Behind the Dictators, tells you that. 1942. So the Jesuits, they say, we even kill our own Freemasons in the protocols. So
Wow.
you guys are young guys. You have your lives ahead of you. It's my humble desire to help you guys learn these things so that you'll know all of this by the time you're 30 or whatever.
Yes, sir.
You can use all this information in your adult life in seeking to restore some sort of personal liberty and national sovereignty, and kind of bring us back where we could be if there's a great awakening, where men would truly repent of their sins and believe the gospel that Christ died for your sins, was buried and rose again, have the forgiveness of sin through the shed blood of Christ, and then have the power of the Spirit of God to resist Satan's Jesuit order and all his secret societies. Yes. And that's what it really is about.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen to that.
Hey, yeah. Eric, I want to just touch a little bit on. I'm sure you've dug into this too, because you were talking earlier about the Protestant Reformation and having the Word of God in everyone's own language, which at the time was English. What is your knowledge on even the Bible translations and all that? Because you had mentioned earlier about you reading the King James Bible, and I've done some research on that. And because of my research, I do stay away from the newer versions of the translation because from my research, they were blessed. Basically, they were blessed by Rome and the Pope and all that.
That's right. See, to destroy historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Western civilization, you have to get rid of the foremost translations, which were Luther's German Bible and Tyndale's English Bible, which later became the AV 1611, done by the 47 learned godly men translators. Okay, so these two Bibles, the German Bible and the English Bible, of the Reformation, of the German Reformation, the Luther Bible is dripping with blood. That's what it took to get the Luther German Bible to the German people. The American the King James Bible is dripping with blood. That's what it took. The Bible to the English-speaking people.
Yes.
So these two books are hated by the Jesuits, specifically the English Bible. And you can read about it in the book called The Jesuit Conspiracy by Jacob Leone. And it's called The Jesuit Conspiracy. And he calls the Bible that viper
Yeah.
that twists around us and bites us, and we will lay hold of it. So back in 1828, they're talking about laying hold of the English Bible and making it of none effect. Well, what you have is the horrible, terrible rise of rationalism, and out of that comes German rationalism, which includes higher criticism of the Bible, of the Reformation Bible.
Yeah.
And you have evil, wicked men like Lockman, Tregelles, Tischendorf, and others that are going to start to undermine the Luther Bible with Tübingen University in Germany, where they don't believe anything with that evil Christian Ferdinand Bauer. And then you have in England, you have the Oxford movement from 1833 to 1845, 12 years. And in the Oxford movement, they're trying to totally neutralize the Anglican Church. And it's the beginning of calling for a revision of the King James Bible.
Right.
So that will happen from 1871 thereabouts to 1885 in this revision committee that's going to meet in secret. They have a secret little Greek text called the Westcott and Hort Greek text.
Yep.
That changed, or that altered, or deviated, I should say, from the Textus Receptus, which is the underlying Greek text, Beza's fourth edition of the Greek text of 1598. They're going to deviate from that from some 5,788 places. Okay?
Yeah.
So now it's going to be a pro-Jerome's Latin Vulgate Greek text. And they're going to eliminate certain things from the Greek text that will impugn the deity of Christ.
That's when they took out the Apocrypha also, right?
No,
in the 1880s?
They took out the Apocrypha in the second edition of the King James. Remember, King James wanted to seek to unite his Catholic and Protestant subjects, so he put the Apocrypha in there. But the Puritans said, no, we're not having this because it's not the scripture. So it was taken out in the second edition of the King James Bible. But nonetheless, so we have the design of, and remember, King James called for that. God used King James to give us his Bible. King James was the most learned theologian of his day as a king. He was trained by the great Scottish theologian, divine.
Yeah.
That was Buchanan.
Yeah.
And so he was taught by him. So James knew Hebrew, Greek, Latin, host of different languages, and he could oversee what was being done in the translation. And so we have the King James Bible, ultimately, and King James' first 10 years as a king is great. The last 10 years is bad because he's going to compromise, and ultimately his son's going to be in the hands of the Jesuits through his wife. So, but nonetheless, you have the King James Bible done by the learned and godly men. You got to get a book called the Translators Revised. Translators Revised. I have it here. It tells all about the translators and John Boyes and Lancelot Andrews and those good and great and godly men. And so we have the epic translation work of the AV 1611. It's going to be translated in over 60 languages. It's going to be taken to the ends of the earth by the British commerce, by the empire. The modern missions is going to begin in the 1800s. And so the Lord will be saving his elect through translations. So the devil's got to get this translation out of the hands of the common man. So he has to copy it. He has to put in a phony baloney translation. So they have to undermine the Greek text of the Textus Receptus, which is representative of 95% of all existent manuscripts. And they're going to use these little goofy all caps uncials that represent only some 5% of the surviving Greek manuscripts, and say they're the oldest and they're the best, which is the oldest is because they were corrupt. And so they were not copied and used. So Erasmus said, I'll never use Sinaiticus. That's a corrupt Vatican document. And Tischendorf, with his particular manuscript, turns out that he was working for a cardinal, which Prince Pinto, was Chris Pinto properly exposed. It's a great work that he did. So they're going to go after the AV 1611, its underlying Greek text. And so that's what they did in the mid to late 1800s. They're going to come out with a Bible for England called the English Revised Version that changes the King James in some 30,000 places. And they're going to come out for America with this American Standard Version 1901 that will do the very same thing. So 1901, it's a new Bible for America. 1885, it's a new Bible for the British. And this will be the beginning of the end of the British Empire and the beginning of the end of the American Empire. And so all these other new Bibles that have come out, the NIV, you got a Jesuit priest that's on it, Carlo Martini. You got the Jesuits backing the Greek text. And so it's all about destruction of the Reformation. You take that Bible out of the hands of the believer, he has no power. You will not have preaching anymore. All you're going to have is little Bible studies and Bible readings and blah, 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 blah. What we need is powerful alpha male preaching, which is what broke the Pope's temporal power in the first place and created Western civilization. So they don't teach that in any Bible colleges. They don't teach preaching. They don't teach any of that. But it's all about exegesis. And we're going to have a little Bible study, which is not powerful, and God doesn't move. So all these apostate churches that are 501c3, they're apostate. They're using apostate versions. They have no power. And is it any wonder the Jesuits have the power in America today that they do? Right. So it goes back to the Bible you read and the doctrine you believe and the history you know to be true, whether you can reverse this.
You know, Eric, the show that I was on, I brought up King James. I'm someone who defends King James and the Bible. But I'm surprised Guy Fawkes and the whole thing, that was one of the first things. I like yourself, Eric, I was not raised to be Christian. I became Christian later on in my life. And one of the things when I was first thinking about it was the King James Bible. Because up until that point, I'm thinking King James, homosexual, Freemason. I don't want to, I don't trust it.
He was never a homosexual. That was.
I know. I found so then someone told me about Guy Fawkes and the 5th of November, which is the same day they killed my guy Bill Cooper. So I look into it and I'm like, wait a sec, Guy Fawkes. And at the time that movie V for Vendetta came out.
Yes.
Right.
And everybody's wearing these masks, and I find out that that's a Guy Fawkes mask. That's a Jesuit who tried to kill King James. Yes. So I got obsessed, and I was like, wait a sec. If King James is one of them, why'd they want to kill him?
Right. Exactly.
And that's when I was like, wait, maybe he must have been a good guy.
That's right. They wanted to blow up the whole parliament with him, his wife, his children.
Yes.
They wanted to blow the whole thing up. And so,
yes, and the English people on the 5th of November would burn effigies of the Pope.
And of Guy Fawkes, that's right.
And of Guy Fawkes, yes, up until recently,
which preserved the Reformation in England, because you can't be a Protestant unless you protest the claims of Rome, the former that the Pope's the vicar of Christ and he has a right to rule all nations and no salvation outside the Catholic Church. That was all protested using Scripture by the English Protestants and Baptists, who were all Calvinists, by the way, at the time. So that's right. King James was a good guy. He authorized translation, and there's a special movie on the King James translation that's narrated by a famous actor. He was in one of the.
Is that the book that changed the world?
I think that's it, because the guy who
turns Jesus also into a liar as well.
A liar.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well,
that's why I like that chick track. Jesus Christ, liar, lunatic, or Lord of all.
Yeah.
It's a very good track.
What verse was that again?
John chapter 7, verse, I think it's 5.
5.
John 7, verse 5. I think that's what, 5 or 6, one of the two.
John 7. Yeah, I remember reading that not too long ago, and that stood out to me because I read a lot, on my phone, mostly the King James version, but it'll pop up, other versions as well. And I remember, seeing the other versions didn't have yet in the.
Yeah. It says John 7, verse 8. John 7, verse 8. And by David Daniels points this out in his ship publication. I think, great for you, David, because it totally destroys the deity of Christ. If he's not God manifest in the flesh, pursuant to 1 Timothy 3:16, he cannot be the Savior.
Right.
We'll just remove that word and you have a mere man who's a liar.
Right. Yeah. And that's why these translation guys are really important.
That's exactly right. I remember I was teaching a class out in Southern California, and the lady wanted to talk to me about D. James, or about what's that guy? He has that church in
Osteen?
John MacArthur.
Oh, yeah.
John MacArthur is completely given over to Westcott and Hort Greek text.
Yeah, yeah.
So I showed him the differences, and he has a whole commentary that she had gotten. I turned to this page and I said, "You want to see this right here, Tina?" And there's about 4 or 5 of them. She couldn't believe it. So it's exactly what they've done. All Dallas Theological Seminary, all your major seminaries are all apostate. They've all departed from the Reformation Bible. Remember, Andrew Jackson said about the King James Bible, he said, "Sir, that book is the bedrock upon which this republic rests." Right. So they got to remove that bedrock. And so that's what they've done. The vast majority of churches are 501c3, they're religious organizations, and it's the ultimate creation of the government. And so there's no power.
Right.
No power.
That's right.
Man.
That's right. And what a lot of people, we were kind of talking about this in our last episode too, is that what a lot of people don't realize is they're like their Bible teachers in these seminaries, they're all Jesuits too, aren't they? I mean, or at least Jesuit trained. They're learning.
Jesuit co-adjutors. There was a notable one in Dallas Theological Seminary, and I had to use his book when I was in Bible college. What was his name? He had his doctorate there from Dallas Theological, but it was the Life and Times of Jesus. I think that's what it was. The Life and Times Jesus during the New Testament. Oh, his name will lose me right now. But he's a Jesuit teaching at Dallas.
Yeah.
So, and there's not a word from Dallas Theological Seminary or any of the other seminaries denouncing the Jesuits and what they've done, at least during the Reformation, not to mention afterward. It's like a complete sellout on the part of all your leading Protestant and Baptist churches. And Baptists are not Protestant, of course, but it's a sellout. Southern Baptist Convention has 1 million Freemasons in it. They use the apostate Bibles of the New English, of the today's English version, which is total heresy. So there's no power, full of Freemasonry, no resistance to the papacy. All they're doing at best is resisting symptoms like being against abortion or whatever. But where did the abortion come from? How about Robert Drinan of Massachusetts, who was a senator from Massachusetts or a congressman from Massachusetts, puts out the abortion law. So the Jesuits are behind the abortion. So we can get all these white Protestants aborting their babies and bringing the judgment of God upon this place with all the innocent blood that's being shed.
Yep.
Never a Jesuit connection. Don't touch it.
They're slick. They're slick. Gosh. So you got to wonder who is running the Jesuit organization. I mean, at this point, I have to think that, I mean, they're being ran by the devil. I mean, himself.
That's right.
He's got to be the general, right?
Yeah.
That's right. The devil runs the Jesuit order. The Jesuit order, as a very important Dominican priest said years ago, Melchor Cano, he said that the Jesuit order they're the forerunners of the Antichrist.
Yep.
He said that.
Melchor, Melchoir, Melchor Cano, Cano. He was a Dominican priest.
I have actually your book open. Melchor Cano, 1560.
Yeah.
Providential Dominican priest, personal letter written 2 days before his death. And it says, the Jesuits are the pioneers of Antichrist.
That's right.
If the members of the society continue as they have begun, God grant that the time may not come when kings will wish to resist them, but will not have the means of doing so.
And that's where we are right now.
Yep.
Right now.
Oh.
The Jesuits control they've confiscated all the gold, all the silver. So there's no country that has gold and silver coins, which they ought to have, or currency redeemable and such. And they're the masters of creation, all the credit. They run all the central banks. All the central banks are held by the Vatican Bank, which is the holding company for all the central banks.
Wow.
So all the credit created by the Federal Reserve, the English bank, all the credit created there with their paper currency is totally under the control of the Jesuit order and their high-level Freemasons. So they are, in fact, irresistible because they control the money. You got to have real money if you're going to resist them. And so that's where they are pretty much today.
Wow. Yeah. So
you know what? The Lord's going to use you young men. You just watch. And he will. If you trust him, you keep your life pure of sin, stay out of the pornography that's everywhere. You keep your life sexually pure, and you're seeking the Lord, your Philippians 4:8, whatsoever things are virtuous, a good report, think on these things. You watch how he answers your prayers and how he uses you to set this back. You
Amen.
watch.
Mm,
Amen.
Amen.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
We're not as young as you think we are, though.
Yeah, I was
My-
thinking the same thing.
You got young voices.
yeah, that's a compliment. I'll take it. But I'm not that old, but I'm 40. I feel
Oh,
40.
you're a youngster.
Yeah.
I turned 70 a few months ago. So no, you guys
Wow.
you got many good years left in you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Amen.
Remember, a man is most productive from 40 to 60.
I believe
Huh.
that.
That's right.
I totally believe that.
Wow.
I didn't even start actually growing up, coming out of what I would call, young adulthood, adolescence, whatever, until I was, 30.
Yeah.
I was still acting like a daggone um, teenager whenever I was 28 years old. I mean, I was just off the hinges.
I was a late bloomer, I guess, compared to all of you. I didn't even find Jesus or nothing until I was like 33.
Oh,
Mhm.
Um,
Well, that's great.
yeah.
That's wonderful.
but
It's never too late to be saved.
Never too
yeah,
late. Yeah. So Eric, I got another question too about because you were talking about Donald Trump earlier, and I know that we got this election thing coming up, and like you said, it just seems I mean, I know that everything is just like controlled
hmm
opposition and all that, like Hegelian dialectic, like you saying, like it's just the same coin, but it's like they brought in Biden in order to make people beg for Trump, and then
Right.
yeah,
he's
That's the
at,
big picture.
yeah,
That's right. The Hegelian dialectic, you control the thesis, which is
hmm
Biden, and the antithesis, which is Trump. And then you control the synthesis, which is the outcome. And this
right,
outcome will be they're going to remember, we don't have elections, we have selections. The book you
yeah,
yep,
wanted is called, written by Collier and Collier, Vote Scam. Vote Scam
hmm
shows you that there hasn't been a real election at least since 1964. And
yep,
so the News Election Service, the NES, News Election Service, which is composed of all the major newscasters and big ABC, CBS, NBC, and all that, they are or overseen to announce who wins the presidency. The
yeah.
news,
It's like a private company that
a
owns.
private company. That's right.
I remember during the Bush when Bush the whole election thing with I don't know if it was 2004 with Florida or whatever, and I remember in front of Congress, one of the guys sitting there that worked for the company, and they were talking about that it's a private company that they're the only people that get to see the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when I realized too. I was like, okay, so yeah, the voting doesn't matter. They could just say 51-49,
Yeah.
Right.
and you would never know, you know.
Exactly right.
it was really
And that's
close, guys.
yeah.
As Jesuit
And
Joseph
like you
Stalin,
said, I felt like it was the same thing with Obama,
of
and
course.
and it was like, oh, they wanted something different, and they were tired of the Bush Clintons, and McCain was like didn't put up a fight and boring fall guy for Obama, and yeah, and I agreed. Trump is the perfect
Perfect.
Hitler, the perfect Hitler
The
for like
perfect.
what you were saying, like this Third Reich, where it's going to be make America great, like make Germany great, and this pride where we're going to go up, and he's going to be the one who gets us into war with Russia and China.
Well,
And again, they're all in on it together, but
they're all in.
like you said, Eric, it's going to get the white patriotic, the only people that really matter, in my opinion, that are a threat, like you said, are these people that have a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other.
Led
And the biggest deception is Trump for those people,
Yeah.
that's right.
because those people wouldn't probably take orders from a
No.
Obama or a Biden, but
Hey.
Trump they believe is one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, everybody knows January 6th was a hoax. Everybody knows that was.
Yeah,
Everybody knows the Capitol Police were told to stand down because they wanted this to happen. So
Yeah.
so Chucky Schumer and all those other Masonic Jews and others working for the Pope say, we have a revolution here and we're going to do something about this. So we're going to arrest all these guys. We're not going to charge them with anything. And under NDAA, they can hold you as long as they want, as long as they don't
Yep.
charge you with a crime. Okay.
Yep.
That's called the Holy Office of the Inquisition.
Mm.
So I want you to see here in the book titled The Beast Reawakens by Martin Lee on page 11. And he says here, when he talks about restoring a form of fascism, it says, the more sophisticated tacticians understood that the fascist game could be played in many ways. Some deemed it best not to advertise their allegiance to the creed. Discarding the fascist appellation or title was an initial step toward articulating a political discourse more in tune with modern times, one that spoke of preserving identity and cultural uniqueness instead of white supremacy. Of necessity, a second coming of fascism would look quite different from the first. Pragmatic and opportunistic, neo-fascist leaders reinvented themselves and crafted euphemisms. Make America great again. And who starts that first? It's not Trump. It's Reagan.
Yeah.
He's the one that talk about
make America great. Yeah.
Crafted you. And Reagan has made a Night of Malta in 1989 with a big thing that J. Peter Grace put out for him. So he's a papal knight. He restores the temporal power. He restores an ambassador to the papacy in 1984, recognized the sovereign state of Vatican City. Reagan was totally in the hands of the papacy. So we got pragmatic, and opportunistic neo-fascist leaders reinvented themselves and crafted euphemisms into electoral platforms that conceding an abided hatred of the democratic process. I mean, campaigning as national populists, they managed to rack up significant vote totals in several countries and redefine the post-Cold War political landscape. But this is exactly what they're doing here. Pragmatic and opportunist, and they have their little names that they have. What do they say? And crafted euphemisms. Make America great again.
Yeah.
I was at a Trump rally over here in Harrisburg, and there was a bunch of white people, white leftist liberals there with the news media. And this one girl, and I was in my duster with my cowboy hat on with my boots, and so they picked me up. Line there. And she said, would you like to be interviewed? And I said,
yes, please.
And she said, well, we'd really like to interview. I said, well, okay, that's fine. So I walked, here's this beautiful white woman. I mean, she's a knockout. And she's the one that has a microphone in her hand. So she's now going to ask me some questions and an attempt to be adversarial to me. And she said, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm here to watch the show. I said, first of all, do you notice at this Trump rally, there's all white people? Do you notice that? And she kind of said, yeah, I do. I said, what do you think's happening here? I said, they're creating a new right. Well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, that's what they're creating, because us white people have been so outraged and victimized the last 60 or 70 years that we've had enough, but they're playing us. And she said to me, well, where's your whip? I said, what do you mean my whip? Well, Indiana Jones, you look like Indiana Jones. Where's your whip? I said, well, I don't have a whip, but I will tell you this. I wrote Vatican Assassins. I proved that Francis Cardinal Spellman was the murderer of our first Roman Catholic president. And this is all on their little TV they got there, their whatever. And I said, furthermore, I said, I'd love to debate some of you about it and talk about it, because you see, the same Roman hierarchy that killed Kennedy is going to put Trump in office. And some guy comes up to me and he says, okay, sir, we thank you for your interview. And
time to go.
That was the end of it. And I never saw it anywhere.
No, they're not publishing that.
No, they don't want that part. But that's the game that they have. And that's why they have all the primarily Roman Catholics helping Trump. They're primarily Catholics, or you have some Masonic Jews like Roger Stone. And so they're going to continue to build the new right, and it will get more and more vicious and violent as time goes on, exactly as the Nazi movement became. And they are not Christian men. They are pagans. They do not believe the gospel. They are not saved. The Bible is not their final authority of faith and practice. They're just a bunch of angry white men who don't know the Lord, and they're being played as suckers by the Jesuit order right into the new right.
Yeah.
And that's my prayer, that doesn't happen here.
Yeah. And I hate it. I mean, it's unfortunate because,
It is.
you know, a lot of people really, really want to believe that, you know, Trump is going to be this type of, you know,
Yeah, drain the swamp.
but
Drain the swamp. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Washington, there's a book you guys got to get. It's called Washington on the Lap of Rome by Justin Fulton. It was written in 1888. And he showed back then that Washington was Rome on the Potomac. Washington on the lap of Rome. There was a secret telegraph wire from the Archbishop of Baltimore to the White House. So the Archbishop, who would be James Cardinal Gibbons at the time, could tell the president what to do. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I believe it. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So don't they all the presidents and the kings and pretty much all the world leaders, don't they still go to the Vatican and meet with the Pope?
Of course.
Like every so
You have to kiss the ring.
Kiss the ring, and you have to dress in black because the Pope dresses in white because he's divine.
right.
He's God. He's whatever he says in Exodus, he's God. And so anybody that comes to see him has to be inferior or subordinate. So what better color to choose than black? So everybody has to dress in black when they go see the Pope.
Wow.
Yep.
So he's basically giving them their marching order.
That's right. He's telling them what to do. And this is what Kennedy refused to do when he went to see the Pope. No,
Yeah,
I'm not.
Kennedy said he won't take orders from him, right?
That's right. That's what he said to a bunch of ministers, Protestant and Baptist ministers in Houston. I'm not going to have any Pope tell me what to do. That's what he said. So that's the beginning of his end.
Yep.
That's before he's put in the office in the 1960s, late 60s. Yep.
Man. Would you I noticed we're crossing the 2-hour mark. Would you be willing to come back on for another episode? Because this has been great, and you've got more knowledge than you can.
I told you, man. He's a legend, Eric.
Well,
Legend.
I should have been at it for how many years now? 45 years. I should remember something. So I can come back if you want sometime. I have to go away for a little bit next week, but I'll be back.
No, we'd love to have you back on. Love it.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe we can talk about flat Earth and the Bible, how it teaches it, and how true science teaches it, and how any true preacher of the gospel would preach flat Earth, because Christ cannot be taken by Satan up on a high mountain and shown all the kingdoms in the world on a globe.
Exactly.
Can't happen. Anyway, we'll have fun with that broadcast, okay, guys?
You're the man, Eric.
Man. Awesome.
The truth is exciting. It's wonderful. It's liberating. And when you stand on it, the Lord blesses you for it.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah, and Vinny, we of you just kind of making this all happen, and it's just been an excellent episode. And Eric, you didn't disappoint. You're just a wealth of knowledge. It's impressive that you remember dates, names the way that you do. It's just amazing. And I can
remember that, but I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Right. Yeah.
Same way.
Well, thank you, Ricardo, man. I really like you guys. I really like what you guys are doing, your podcast. And yeah, as you guys see, Eric's amazing. I'm always excited to hear Eric talk. So this was awesome. And, like Eric, anything you guys want, hit me up. We could do things in the future.
Sure.
And, I'm looking forward to hearing Eric next time too.
Yeah. So Eric, real quick, just one more time for the audience, let them know where they can find your book, your website, and any other social media platforms that you may have, because I think people really need to read your book and your research and stuff.
Absolutely.
I have two websites, VaticanAssassins.org and 247worldradio.com. And you can pick up my ebook at Vatican Assassins. I have the store with some of the things there. And then I also have my recordings that you can purchase. on 24/7 World Radio for like the last 11 years or so. And then you can also listen for free. The recordings I have up on 24/7 World Radio, when you bring it up, they have show archives free. And you go click on that and you scroll on down to EJP Hour 1, EJP Hour 2. EJP Hour 1 has a lot of me and George Widger there. And Hour 2 is some of my preaching and then some other topics that I do that would be of interest. So you can listen there. I have a dear brother, a Jewish brother in Christ, who would post my things on YouTube, but I've been kicked off YouTube about 8 or 9 times. And so he always puts me up under some other name.
Yeah, I think you're like Vatican Assassins 8 or 9. It's up to.
Yeah, right. But anyway, I'm just glad there's an interest because, for a long time, there really was no interest. And hopefully as things get worse, people will turn to the Lord, seek his face, and then realize it's the Roman papacy that has done this to us. And we need to resist it by the power of the Spirit of God.
Amen.
Well said. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
All right, brethren. Well, Lord bless. Thank you so much for having me on. And Lord bless your listeners. And may we continue to do that which is right.
Yes.
Amen.
God bless you, Eric.
Lord bless you guys.
Thank you, Eric. God bless you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.